welcome to this second show and tell for the Procurement Centre of Excellence project, looking at new services to support the procurement and commercial professionals in Wales. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Ross Gregory and I'm the Delivery Director at Parago, and we're working in partnership with our colleagues at Kershaw to deliver the alpha phase of this project. So today's format, it will be a bit of a presentation from the team, and then there'll be opportunity to ask any questions on the areas that we've covered at the end. So to start off, I'll provide a quick update on the new name and brand for the project that we initially shared in the last show and tell. And then my colleagues Warren and Angharad will be providing an overview of the backlog ideas that we've been working on with the community, and then the results from the survey that we issued to help us prioritise the changes we'll be working on for the remainder of the project. So in the last show and tell, we provided an update on the work that we've been doing to develop a new name and brand for the project. And with input from the community, the name that has been agreed and that you'll see when we use the next show and tell is Keyed. And that's the sort of branding that we'll be using from now on in. So we had 4 brand concepts for Keyed, and we shared these with our testing group to find a preferred option. So this was the preferred option from the testing group, and it takes the C from the word keyed, and then that creates a chain link that represents the joining or bringing together of something. So some of the comments that were included about this version were: the imagery of interlocking chains seems to promote a stronger, unified, linked up notion, as in the links of a procurement and supply chain. It signifies linking together, working together, and community. And while there were some concerns about the logo not being clear that it related to procurement or public services, we did want to flag up that we intend to use the branding accompanied by a strapline, and when used as a prefix such as Keyed Weithio, we believe that this will help embed the name as part of the commercial and procurement community in Wales. So I'd now like to hand you to my colleague Warren, who's going to run through the 11 service ideas that we've been working on with the community.
Thank you, Ross. So if you could just move on to the next slide. Thank you very much. So briefly recap, because I don't assume that everybody on the call today has been with us for the entire journey. So just very briefly, we started with effectively 3 areas that were part of the requirement when we began the project, and they were around sharing best practice, developing insights, and access to training. And then at the Wales event in early November last year, we conducted a survey to ask participants at the event which were the areas that they felt they needed the most support with in terms of the what the Procurement Centre of Excellence project could provide, and the top scoring response was around regulatory change. We know this is an absolutely critical area of change affecting the Welsh public sector more so than in England. We've got the public procurement bill currently being discussed and debated within UK Parliament, as well as the Social Partnerships and Public Procurement Wales bill. So we weren't surprised that we saw this as at the top, but in addition to that, and fairly closely behind on almost level pegging, was contract management and the net zero policy area as well, which you may know is the initial Welsh public procurement policy note 1221 that we were asked to focus on as part of this initial phase of the work. But also early on in the project, the need for us to focus on capability and leadership came out very clearly. So that also features in our kind of organising framework for this work. And these are depicted in terms of the rows and also then the columns in terms of needs. So based on our engagement with the community and the stakeholders in a very as broad as we possibly could across the Welsh public sector, through the surveys we've conducted, the conversations, the groups that we've participated in, the people we've met, we felt that we could quite clearly identify potential solutions that would fit very neatly into this organising framework. So I'm just going to go spend about a minute or two on each of those, which represents the 11 that Ross indicated just now. So starting at the top of this table here under best practice, the first one was around capturing and reporting carbon emissions data. So through the conversations, we know that there have been some efforts underway to use spend data-based reporting on carbon emissions, which has had, to some extent, varying degrees of success. But also we see that there's an opportunity here to potentially move to much more actual reporting on activities that are taking place post-contract award through delivery of services and procurements themselves, but also is potentially using the stages pre-procurement when we're planning what activity is going to take place and estimating what the reduction in carbon emissions could be, and then using the actuals to compare kind of estimates to what is actually happening on the ground. So that was one area that we put forward. The second area under best practice was looking at ways of perhaps enhancing the content of the WPPN 1221 itself, using a user-centered and design-led approach. So this was looking at how we might be able to help the community to find information very easily, to be perhaps a bit more interactive around the guidance that was associated with that WPPN, and ultimately to help make policy implementation as easy as possible. The third area on this particular section is, if you could, yeah, it's still on the screen, is looking at a curated collection of guidance around the procurement journey. So we know that the Welsh Government is working on a procurement journey route map. So at each stage of the procurement journey, so covering pre-procurement, procurement, and post-procurement contract implementation, how can we help draw together existing content that is already kind of proliferated across the Welsh public sector to help make those steps as clear, simple, and as effective as possible to help procurement and commercial practitioners to plan for, complete, and deliver on procurements as effectively as possible, with a particular focus in our case on net zero implementation of the WPPN 1221. Can you just move on to the next slide? Thank you very much. So this was around, then moving on to the insights area. So we were looking at the possibility to develop a standardized template for developing case studies, capturing information about how people have approached their particular areas of procurement. And this was to help bring some standardization. We know from our conversations that there are good examples of better practice that have been captured within perhaps subsets of the communities or within certain groups that are operating across the Welsh public sector. We suspect that those the forms and the styles and structure of those case studies are perhaps inconsistent. So by bringing a consistent approach, we help to make those things much easier to find, to compare, and also to then give us kind of an information architecture around how we might then store and present and make that information as useful as possible for the community. The second one within the insight row was around mapping the existing communities and the groups that exist, and also the participants. We've spoken to lots of people in lots of groups, so we know that there are everybody's very dedicated to contributing their time to make these areas work for their own particular area, but also to contribute to the wider reform agenda in Wales. But equally, we're hearing that people are time poor, and there's increasing kind of constraints on people's time. So using a map of the existing activities could help us identify areas where there could be greater focus for individuals and groups, but also provide the effectively the sort of connective tissue for the community itself. So that was another area that we've put forward as part of the insight work stream. And then if you could just move on to the next slide, please. Then in terms of access to training, the first one we suggested was looking at how we might bring together with an assumption for using the web and user-centered and design-led approaches to draw out common aspects from the different kind of tooling that we've seen and initiatives that various people are working on across the Welsh public sector, which are looking at, for example, capability assessments for individuals and teams and organisations, and then making recommendations for how individuals could step forward on their path of capability building, you presenting this in a way which takes full advantage of what the web can provide. The second one around training was again relating to the procurement journey and the route map, was to signpost areas within that end-to-end life cycle where individuals, based on an assessment of capability, could easily access relevant training in a way which is structured to respect and be kind of tailored to their particular stage of development. So, and that training could take many forms and could be delivered in different forms as well. So not necessarily like classroom-based training or e-learning. It could also be bite-sized digestion of that training, self-managed learning, many different forms that training could take, but fundamentally it's about presenting training, capability building options that are tailored to the needs of the individual in relation to each stage of the procurement journey. The third one in the access to training area was around preparing for large-scale complex change. So we've already touched on the fundamental change that's going to happen in relation to the procurement regulations, both UK-wide and in the Welsh context specifically. How do we then turn that very structural change into something very specific and targeted towards, in our initial case of focus, net zero decarbonisation? So understanding the art of the possible, as it were, in that the changes to the regulations enable, and then using that to help with very practical implementation through training for achieving net zero. The next area was on overlaying the regulatory reform needs with net zero. So how do we make sure that everything that we've kind of been speaking about already has a very practical kind of set of activities that could take place to support individuals on that journey, very much related to the previous stage, the previous point that I made on the preparing for large-scale complex change. but again, grounding it in areas that are relevant to different stages of the commercial life cycle. So it could be, how do I approach early market engagement in this new way to design outcomes and impact for my contracts that have a positive impact on reducing emissions, and how do I manage that through contract delivery, as an example. And then I think still on this slide, yes, is looking at existing ways of kind of measuring progress that have already been published within documentation, such as the route map for decarbonisation. There's a very useful kind of time-bound and progress-based evaluation of what's expected for example, 2021 up to 2021, then beyond to 2022 to 2026. What does that mean in terms of, as it's described within that document, well on our way? So using the individual capability assessments that we've proposed in some of the other potential service solutions to then baseline that with those expectations for where people should be, and then using that to then plot a path for structured skills and capacity building to help shift the dial forwards in relation to net zero. So that effectively was the long list of 11. We then presented that to the testing groups that have volunteered their time, and thank you very much for everybody who's done that, with a request to effectively prioritize which ones of those they would like to see developed. And our plan is to take forward one area for each of the 3 areas that I've discussed. So sharing best practice, developing insight, and access to training. And we've got the results from the survey came in just 2 days ago, I think it was, thereabouts. And we've presented that to the test group yesterday. So if we can just go on to the next slide, please. I think this is where I hand over to Angharad.
Yes, thank you, Warren.
Okay.
So as Warren said, we shared the survey with our user testing group, asking them to choose just one service from each category that they would like us to develop further. So if we go to the next slide, please, Ross. So in this slide, you will see the results from the sharing best practice category. You will see that 40% chose procurement journey best practice as their preferred option, with 29% feeling that capturing and reporting carbon emission data was a priority. 24% wanted to look further at a curated collection of Welsh under the nation's material, with only 7% wanted it to work on the content design of the WPPN 1221. So if we go on to the next slide, we then moved on to ask about the priorities within developing insights. And there was a clear winner here as well, with 64% wanted a case study template information architecture library, and only 36% wanting us to map out the existing communities. Next slide, please. The last question was looking at the access to training. And we had 40% stating that procurement journey best practice content was their preferred option, 23% choosing overlaying regulatory reform needs and net zero needs, 21% wanting us to prioritise preparing for large-scale complex change. Then we had 14% wanting us to look at the baselining against well on our way, and only 2% choosing the option to map across existing tools. So that's what we found in the survey, and I will now hand back over to Warren to explain what that means as we move forward with this Alpha project.
Thank you, Angharad. So if you go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so just to then draw that together based on the survey results. So in shared best practice, the one that will be taken forward for development and prototyping and testing is the capture and reporting carbon emissions data, which will cover across all of those, the 4 areas in terms of areas where it would support, so contract management, regulatory change, net zero policy, and capability and leadership. But I think if you just go on to the next slide, we will also, go back to, I should also say, on the previous slide, I should also say that we're bringing that together with the one that scored the highest, which is around the procurement route journey. So yeah, we see that there's an opportunity here to not only ensure that the best practice that's being captured is mapped to the different parts of the procurement journey, but also we can use that to then start to capture some of the data that is really vital to help understand that we're having the impact that is intended, but also to use the data to inform continuous improvement and further developments. So that was just a slight omission from that table there. If you could just go back to the previous slide, please, Ross. I think you're on training. Yeah, insight. So again, coupled with the point on sharing best practice, the one that scored the highest was around case study, developing a consistent case study template, which provides an information architecture and a way that we can then store and make findable and presentable as part of the library the case studies that people will be creating. Now, there's a nice link here with in terms of the kind of post-procurement contract implementation. Although we are focused on the whole commercial life cycle, we see a really important kind of point in helping people to capture the lessons learned, the approaches that worked, things that perhaps didn't work so well as part of that case study, but in doing so, using that stage to then capture as data the things that are actually having a positive impact on reducing carbon emissions, i.e. supporting WPPN 1221. So there's a nice relationship between those two things there. And you'll also see when we move on to the next slide on training, then using kind of the combination of those previous things is, okay, right, well, if as an individual, a practitioner, or somebody who perhaps doesn't associate with the profession of contract management or commercial procurement, but has a really important part of their job to manage high value contracts, then how do we then identify and signpost to training that is relevant to any particular stage within the procurement journey, the commercial life cycle, that they feel that they may need some support, professional development, or even just some basic entry-level training just to get them on that journey. So that's the one that will be taken forward for the access to training work stream as well, and we can see that effectively does cover contract management, net zero policy, and capability and leadership. So we think also that could lead nicely into the regulatory change, and we'll be speaking to the team about what that could mean going forward. So yeah, I think that's it. I think what is just to re-emphasize that none of these things kind of exist in a vacuum. They all are interconnected. So I think that's a strength which you can look to build on as we go through this stage and beyond of the project. So next slide, please, Ross. I think
that's it in terms of coverage, Warren, isn't it, for this?
Okay.
Yeah. So thank you very much for that. One thing I did want to remind everybody for this session is obviously we've still got a bit of a journey to go to build out those particular areas. So if you haven't already signed up for our test group, here's the link again. I'll leave that up there for a little while. Yeah, so like I say, you can sign up for our test group and get involved with the development of those 3 services that we'll be working on up till our next decision point, which is at the end of March 2023. So on that note, I think we're finished for the slides that we have for today. So if there are any questions, please feel free to either ask them directly or to post them in the chat.
Just had a thought, Ross, I probably should have said, but I'll say it now, is even though we may not be taking something forward for this stage, those items will effectively go into our backlog for future development, and we will continuously prioritise those subject to continuing beyond March, as well as potentially other areas that we might identify through the engagement with the communities. So we're focusing on these because the community themselves, the test group, have expressed those to be of the most importance for them at this stage.
Thanks very much,